On this episode of MotoringBox, we're going to be overhauling the brakes on my AU Falcon. Let's go. Welcome back to MotoringBox. I'm Sean McKellar and this is my AU Fairmont Ghia, which I've owned for about 2 years now. And we're sort of giving this thing a little bit of a once-over every now and then as things need to be replaced. Now this car does have a little bit of a shudder in the front brakes, and that is a fairly typical common Falcon problem, especially with AU Falcon Series 1. This one is actually a Series 2, so it just goes to show you that it can still happen to these cars as well. And usually if you do have a bit of a shudder in your front brakes, it's because your rotors are warped a little bit, and when the pads clamp against them, the whole thing kind of basically shakes with the rotor. So you feel it through the pedal, and you can go and get your discs machined and that will take care of the problem, or you can actually replace them altogether. Machining your existing discs is obviously the cheaper option, but I actually bought a set of tick-fit wheels a couple of months ago. The guy was moving house and he threw in a set of brand new front Bosch brake rotors. So I scored these front rotors for free, so I thought, you know what, you can't put old brake pads with new rotors. So I went out and bought some new Bendix front brake pads. And then I thought, if you're doing the fronts, you may as well do the backs as well. So I bought some Bosch brake rotors for the back, and I also bought some Bendix pads for the back as well. So we're going to be overhauling the entire braking system, apart from the fluid, but we might do that another day. So what is the cost of this job? Well, currently, the front rotors I think you can get for about 120, 130 bucks a pair. I paid $109 for the rear pair. For the front brake pads, it was another $79, and for the rears, it was another $62. So I'll put a tally on the bottom of the screen. I'm not going to try and add that up off the top of my head. But it's not a lot of money to really overhaul the braking system of your car. I've never actually taken the wheels off this thing, so I don't know how much meat is on the existing pads. So we'll pull them off, we'll see how they look, but we're going to be replacing them anyway. So I've never done this before. I'm not an expert, but I'm going to bring you along for the ride and we'll see how it goes. So here's a look at our existing rotors. They do have a bit of a lip here on them, but overall, I haven't measured them, but overall it looks like they do have a bit of meat left on them. But for the price of a new pair of rotors for the front and the back, I don't feel too bad about throwing these ones away. So let's get the caliper off and we'll have a look at the pads. Now this caliper is slightly jammed on because of that lip on the rotor, but we can coax it off with a bit of force. I'm not that advanced. So get a load of the thickness of that, and then here's a look at the brand new Bendix one. So it's more than twice the amount of meat on the brand new one. So look, these had a little bit of life left in them, but considering we're replacing the rotors, you definitely want to put brand new brake pads on. So yeah, we'll slam these on with the Bosch rotors and we'll see how they perform. So this is perhaps the easiest part of the job. So we're just taking off the existing rotor. Some cars do have an extra sort of bolt or screw here that sort of holds the rotor on, but that's really just to help locate the rotor, and then once the wheel is bolted on, that holds the rotor in place. This one pretty much came off straight away. Some of them you might need to bash with a mallet on the reverse side. But yeah, it's pretty much good to go.
So now we can move on to the fun part of reinstalling our new brake discs. Now these are actually held on by the wheel once you bolt it back up, so you just have to sit it roughly in place for now. And then we can bolt up the front caliper assembly using the 2 bolts which we took out earlier. These should be torqued up to spec, and I will put the torque setting on the screen for easy reference. From there we also need to loosen off these bolts here on either end, because this lets you unhinge the caliper to refit your new brake pads. And I've heard some conflicting information here. Some people say you need to put brake grease on the backside of the pads to try and prevent or reduce the amount of noise that they create in operation. But some people say you need it, some people say you don't. So I'm just putting some on just in case, because surely it can't hurt. So you just need to slide the brake pads into place, push them up against the disc, and then make sure the disc is roughly in the correct spot. From there we can also pull out our little slide pins and make sure they've got enough grease on them. These look like they're a little bit dry, so I'm going to put a liberal application of the brake grease onto them. Not going over the top, but just making sure they've got a nice even covering before reinstalling it and make sure it slides in and out nice and smoothly. We also need to make sure this little dust cover boot is installed correctly, and we can also install a bolt into the end of the slider and then pull it in and out to confirm that it is operating correctly. It should be nice and smooth without any binding or grittiness in the operation. I then wiped off any excess grease, and I'm also going to use this G-clamp to compress the pistons back into the housing, to make sure when we swing this whole assembly up over the pads that it actually fits in there correctly. Now this actually caused me a little bit of an issue a bit later on, but I'll save the explanation to the end of the video. But spoiler alert, depending on the age and the condition of these pistons, they may need to be rebuilt. So with the pistons pushed back in, I can swing the caliper closed, refit the bolt, and then we're going to do the exact opposite on the other side of the assembly, removing the bolt, pulling out the slider, greasing it up, reassembling it, putting back the dust cover, ensuring that it slides in and out nice and smoothly, before swinging the caliper housing back down, bolting everything up, and we're good to go. With one final check that everything's been torqued up correctly, we can then reinstall the wheel, roughly tighten the wheel nuts before lowering the car down onto the ground, and then torquing the nuts up finally to the specific torque setting.
Right, so I'll turn our attention to the back now. These ones don't look too bad either. Similar story to the fronts, but yes, we'll get everything replaced. Should be pretty much the same story as the front, I think. The back ones do have a little bolt here which we need to back out, but apart from that, pretty much the same story. Here goes nothing. Hey, we got it. Fantastic.
Now I found out after the fact that these handbrake pads are actually held in by a retaining clip on the right hand side of the assembly, so do make sure that your pads are still contained behind this clip and not flapping around like mine are here. Otherwise they will come into contact with the disc when your car is driving and you'll have to come back like I did and disassemble everything and put them back into place. So with the new disc in place, I'm going to put the existing nuts on just to push the disc onto the assembly, and you will need to adjust your handbrake as well, which I actually did in the vehicle cabin. If you have a look down between the seat and the center console, you'll see if you pull the handbrake boot away, there'll be a little adjusting nut on the end of a shaft. So you need to rotate this thing counterclockwise, it'll loosen off your handbrake and make sure it isn't binding on your brand new brake discs. From there, we're basically doing what we did on the front. We're unhinging the whole caliper assembly, we're putting in new pads, we are compressing the pistons, we are lubricating the slide pins, and then we're basically bolting everything up, torquing everything back to spec, and putting it back the way it was. And just like before, the disc is held on by the wheel, so we're bolting that on roughly in place before lowering the car down and then doing a final torque setting on each bolt. So after doing the exact same thing on the passenger side, it's now time to hit the road and see how everything goes.
Alrighty guys, so we are out on the road testing our new rotors and pads, and I have to say this has been quite an arduous journey. What actually happened after I installed the new rotors and the pads, I found out that the front driver's side rotor was actually, the brakes were dragging and it was really starting to overheat the rotor, and you could smell the brakes just starting to burn. So what I actually did is, there's a way you can actually adjust the brake booster on these cars. I haven't actually filmed a video about it, but if there's enough demand in the comment section, let me know. I can film a little how-to on how you can adjust your brake booster. That seems to have solved it probably 90 or 95%. When I first started driving the car after that, it feels like it was still dragging ever so slightly, but the brakes are not overheating anymore. So what's probably going to happen is the pads are going to just wear down that little bit and then it's going to be fine. But really what that points to is probably the caliper on that front driver's side probably needs to be overhauled, because I think what actually happens is those pistons inside the caliper can actually sort of corrode on the walls of the piston, and where it slides in and out of the little housing there within the caliper, I think it can sort of jam a little bit and it doesn't sort of retract as far as it should to sort of let the pressure off the pads, off the rotors. So look, I think in this instance I'm probably going to leave it alone because I'm just rolling along. The car rolls almost perfectly now. It's not dragging or slowing down anywhere near as much as it used to. So yes, I think what's going to happen is those pads are just going to wear down a little bit. If it's dragging, hopefully they'll wear down to a point where they don't drag anymore. So look, that is a little bit dodgy, but hey, I don't really want to have this car off the road to pull the rotors out, to send them off somewhere to get them rebuilt. I could try and do it myself, but I don't really want to mess around with that on a daily driven car. If this thing's out of action, then I'm kind of a little bit stuffed. So probably just going to drive it as it is. But yes, look, it's funny how you can get thrown a curveball like that from time to time. So yeah, that's really it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video to be slightly educational. Be careful if you attempt this job because you may run into similar issues as to what I ran into. But yes, that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.